Greetings, fellow Earthlings, and welcome to my humble abode. Hope you naked apes are doing well out in the wilderness. We've decided to try and do something different today, on this channel, anyway. Some retro gaming channels, YouTube retro gaming channels, have piqued my interest lately. The likes of Generation Pixel and PompeyGamesRoom, just for an example. Great channels, by the way. If you haven't checked them out, you definitely should. So it's inspired me to try and muddle my way through a top 5 video. And given that it's the spooky Samhain season, I thought to myself, why not start with a survival horror genre that's close to my mutated gaming heart, the Resident Evil series. So this will be my dodgy attempt at a top 5 personal Resident Evil game. So we've given it a little bit of thought, and we're not going to go super in depth on any of the titles we talk about because knowing me, we could be here for hours. So we're going to wing it and keep it relatively swift. So let's get this started. Number 5, Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, I enjoyed both the Revelations titles, to be honest with you, but this one intrigued me that little bit more overall and over time. Obviously, we have the long-awaited return of fan favourite Barry Burton, and even his daughter makes her debut. Moira Burton, and the legendary Claire Redfield, makes a return, which is always a good thing in my book anyway. She's a character that has just grown on me more and more as the years have gone by, to be honest. She's with an anti kind of biohazard company called TerraSafe, I believe. What does it say? Claire Redfield and Moira Burton awaken in an abandoned detention facility on a remote island. Moira's father, Barry, teams up with newcomer Natalia to find them, with horrific creatures lurking in the darkness, of course. Can anyone hope to make it off the island alive? I really like the dark, dirty, desperate feel to this game overall. Ouroboros is being used, the T Phobos virus, which Alex Wesker creates, is being used. Alex Wesker was a fascinating character for me. Obviously the link to the Wesker children and Albert Wesker, her brother. Yeah, so overall, surprisingly, and this is the PS4 version, the one I'm more familiar with was downloaded on the PlayStation 3, and I did manage to platinum that. It was a firm but fair platinum, in my opinion. Some people might disagree. And you didn't have to do too much in the raid mode, even though that was a nice addition overall in both games, Revelations 1 and 2. The raid mode cost me the platinum for Revelations 1, because I think I couldn't get an S rank or an SS rank on one mission. So that wasn't ideal, but that's the way it goes sometimes. So yeah, the Alex Wesker's interest in Franz Kafka's writings was something I wasn't expecting in a Resident Evil title. The existential crisis she has when a certain consciousness transferring experiment seems to have been successful. So yeah, and of course it leaves it a little bit ambiguous at the end without any spoilers. So overall, rather surprisingly, when I started this, I probably wouldn't have thought Resident Evil Revelations 2 would have broken into the top 5, but life's full of curveballs and surprises, I guess. So yeah, number 5 on my list, Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, Straight on to number 4. Another fairly surprising entry, but a modern title that ushered in the current mainstream era of the series. Resident Evil 7. Now I was skeptical on how this first person evolution, or perhaps mutation, would be more apt given this particular series. But overall I really enjoyed the atmosphere and the characters in this title. Enjoyed the nods and the references and homages to the previous titles. The trailer theme really got me hyped up for this. The Go Tell Aunt Rhody, or creepy version of Go Tell Aunt Rhody that everybody's dead. That's still stuck in my head to this day, to be honest. Still gives me some wee shivers, truth be told. Perfect song for this game. And the build-up just caught me at a right time, after Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 being much more action orientated. This was perfect timing to bring it back to that survival horror, slow, steady type of game, you know? So yeah, managed to get the platinum on this one as well. Wasn't that difficult actually, if memory serves, because they gave you these coins that you could get to help, items basically that could help you run through the hardest mode in the game. So yeah, overall, decent story, decent atmosphere, the introduction of the Winters family, and indeed the Baker family meeting. So number 4 on my list, Resident Evil Biohazard, Resident Evil 7. Okay, let's boldly move on to number 3, shall we? Ah yes, well, the other 2 picks so far on this list may be somewhat controversial. I reckon this one will be almost universally embraced, as far as pixelated picks go. This classic actually started it all, Resident Evil was, for me. I recall a much younger, how do I say this, less Viking vagabond looking me, wandering through Dublin city centre, and all the promotional material for this title was hitting the stores. It was in all the gaming stores, and obviously that caught my eye, and that's none other than Resident Evil 2 for the PS1. And I think most people will agree that this is a absolute classic, survival horror wise, you know? Yeah, very, very fond memories of this, and obviously it's old enough that there was no internet, so I recall watching my friend play more than me actually. I was actually just helping him try to figure out the puzzles and watching the narrative unfold. And just as a bit of a fun fact, he played through the vast majority of the game, and the first time I actually picked up the PlayStation console to play Resident Evil was he was stuck. A friend called Anthony Farrell, we're still in touch to this day, he was stuck on the Tyrant, Mr. X, when he falls into the hot lava and mutates for his final time. And we weren't sure what to do back then. We weren't sure whether we were supposed to run down the clock or try and do enough damage to him and whatnot. And I remember being quite late, and he was in my neck of the woods, in this house, this very room actually, although it looked very different back then. And it was getting too late, and he headed off home, and I felt a bit brave, and picked it up and actually tried to take on the boss myself, and after a go or two, managed to beat him and then follow on and complete the game. And straight after binging on Resident Evil 2, I hunted down a copy of Resident Evil 1, which one of my other friends actually had, a lad called Paddy Morrow, who lived just around the corner from me. And he gave that to me for little or nothing, and the rest is history. As they say, I've been collecting Resident Evil games and playing Resident Evil games and keeping in touch with the series ever since. And a lot of my best friends, really, this is their number one Resident Evil title. George Mahon, one of my oldest, closest buddies, still absolutely loves this title. And of course, the relatively recent remake. But this gets the edge over the remake for me. Even though the remake was great, don't get me wrong, there was a few things that didn't quite hit home with me on the remake. Off the top of my head, Irons being more of a perverted character, rather than in the original, like, he came across to me anyway as a more cold, cruel, foreboding type of character, whereas he came across more bumbly and creepy in the remake, for example. And just little things, Mr. X killing Ben as opposed to mutated Birkin killing Ben. Small narrative choices, and it's probably the nostalgia for this particular title that just edges it out, you know. So yeah, number 3 on my list. You know, what more can be said about Resident Evil 2 that people don't know? Leon's introduction, Claire's introduction, and just an all-round really enjoyable, fun survival horror game. So number 3 on the list, Resident Evil 2 for the PS1. So, straight into the top 2 now. The suspense of it all. Calm down, lads. Calm down. We're almost there. This is an iconic one. It's the remake of the original, the game that started it all. So the Resident Evil remake for the Nintendo GameCube is my number 2. Phenomenal looking game, especially at the time, but still holds up to this day, to be honest with you. Had everything the original had for me, and then added to it. The defensive weapons, the introduction of the Crimson Heads, that whole mechanic. Lisa Trevor was introduced, which later went on to be a key narrative factor, because we found out that experimentation on her eventually led to William Birkin creating the G-Virus. You had all the classic bosses in the original game, but just looked so much more menacing in this game. Neptune, Plant 42, Tyrant, T-002, the Black Tiger, Yawn. They were all there, you know. Just brilliant game. I did get the platinum on it when it was, I think I downloaded it for the PlayStation 3. So once the platinum was available, I just played through the game. Don't think it was that difficult. It's more difficult to remember it now. But you had to do multiple playthroughs. One of them had to be fast, I believe, knife only, and invisible enemy mode. But because I was just so familiar with this particular title, the platinum came quite easily, to be honest. So yeah, the remake of the original Resident Evil for the Nintendo GameCube is my number 2. Okay guys, I better wrap this up. It is getting dark and the veil be thin. We know some funky, strange things start happening when the veil is thin, especially in the land of Erin, which I'm lucky enough to live. So I don't think anybody would be overly surprised by my number 1 on the list. But you never know. Controversy in the video game realm isn't entirely unheard of. Resident Evil Survivor, of course. Just an absolute legendary game. Yeah? I kid. Legendary probably for all the wrong reasons. Just joking, just joking. But the actual pick some people may find it more controversial than others, I suppose. Resident Evil Code Veronica X for the PlayStation 2. Now, I first came across this game through a friend, and he was actually playing on the Dreamcast, I believe. But I picked it up not too much longer after that on the PlayStation 2. I've always enjoyed this game. This mad mix of a game. It's probably the last one to have that fixed camera angle, semi-fixed camera angle, I believe they say. But I just remember Wesker's return, this completely unexpected return, just blew my mind back in the day. And he obviously had some new abilities, and he was busy slapping Claire around while announcing a newfound hatred for Chris. The sick, strange, sordid family dynamic between the Ashfords, I thought was quite fascinating. Alexia Ashford and all the plot twists, and you know, is she with us? You know, was she real? Was she made up? Back and forth, I really enjoyed. The eccentricities of Alfred, I'm sure, is well known. Even their father, Alexander, and that whole story, without getting too much into it, I found really interesting. And I just enjoyed that Chris was once again trying to locate Claire and save her, and vice versa. Really good game. I just can't find the words to say how fond I am of this title. The soundtrack I found really good. The atmosphere, the pacing, the difficulty. I'm sure people remember that tyrant fight on the plane, you know, in close proximity. Even the encounter before that, when you essentially had to get past them on a really narrow corridor. The Gulp Worm, the kind of black widow spider in Antarctica, and just the whole thing was just brilliant to me. And I felt I remember playing it a couple of years after, and it didn't feel quite as long as when I first played it. Probably because I was obviously dead familiar with the puzzles and exactly where you have to go at what time and so on, and that obviously helps. But yeah, Resident Evil Code Veronica X is my number one of all time, and I can't see anything actually beating this, strangely enough. And I know there's a lot of other people that may say, oh, you've left out this title and that title, and I do have a fondness for the vast majority of the Resident Evil games. Especially as the years has gone by, I tend to be positive, and I can focus on what each one brought to the table, and not get sucked into the more negative aspects, you know. And people will probably question why Resident Evil 4 is probably the biggest heavy hitter, isn't my particular favourite. I had a ropey start with Resident Evil 4 because it was just too different to what I was used to. When Resident Evil 4 first came out, it just wasn't as scary to me. You know, it was a bit too action orientated. The puzzles were kind of dumbed down. Everything was kind of shoot it. You don't know what to do, shoot it. There's a glowing thing on the roof, shoot it. As the years have gone on, I'm happy to report that I do actually really enjoy Resident Evil 4 and 5 and even 6. But not enough for them to make it into my personal top 5. So that's it, guys. Feel free to leave comments down below and tell me where I got it wrong or misinterpreted something, or your preferences and so on and so forth, because, you know, the interaction between us and the community is what makes it special, as Generation Pixel often reminds us. So, I love yous and leave yous. slán of all you, look after yourselves, be kind to all kinds, and good luck.